Generally speaking, as far as this series goes, I don't really do requested videos. Certain vehicles might come under consideration, but as a general rule, I like to keep it totally a surprise, so that nobody could really predict what is going to be the next car in Unsung Heroes. However, this car was suggested a little while back. It may have been a couple of episodes back now. But also more specifically, this particular episode and the particular vehicle ties in very nicely with a video which I of course released earlier today for an unboxing video of a certain BMW. And that BMW was a very significant one to the brand in terms of motorsport, and that was the 1999 V12 LMR. An LMP 900 car, which of course got BMW a win at the 24-hour race in 1999, and also in that same year a win at the Sebring 12-hour race. Now, that car is a great prototype, it's a well-known one, it's iconic for the brand, and so they decided to take the inspiration of that car, that kind of racing use, racing purpose, that pure focus on being as fast as possible around a track, but also great as an endurance race car, and then combining elements of that with their forthcoming foray into the SUV world with the X5. And the result was what BMW called the X5 Le Mans. Now, this car is absolutely insane, and as soon as I learned years and years ago what this car was, I immediately fell in love with it, because it's essentially the BMW equivalent of the Renault Espace F1. It's so similar, it's unbelievable. They both have race-derived engines from their respective manufacturers, race engines which did good work, and they're put into a vehicle for marketing purposes, which is a large, multi-purpose, big people mover, in effect. In the case of Renault, it was a minivan or people carrier, and in the case of BMW, it's an SUV. But both of them have many seats, they're big, they're heavy, and although they can be made fast, they're not typically thought of as performance cars. Even the X5 isn't really thought of as a performance car, and back when it was produced, certainly not. However, what they chose to do with this car was pretty cool, because just like when Renault put the 3.5-litre Williams V10 into a minivan, what BMW chose to do was to cram that 6-litre naturally aspirated V12, which itself was basically an evolution of the McLaren F1's engine, which of course brought that car a lot of success as well, into an SUV, and then build and modify the rest of the car around that concept to make it into an extreme track toy, which would get people's anticipation and excitement, and also just the acceptance of a vehicle like the X5, which BMW hadn't done before, to be greater, as a marketing scheme to make the car more desirable. This is a proper BMW, if you will, or at least that was the intention, to make people feel that about the production version. And that kind of worked, because look at them now. There are loads of different BMW SUVs, there have been multiple facelifts, and they've sold tens of hundreds of thousands of models. Now, this car is by far the most extreme of any of their SUVs, not surprisingly, and one of the reasons why is because not only have you put an LMP engine into it, which in itself is insane, but they actually went a step further, because this car, of course, has no racing regulations to run under, because it's not a race car, just like the Renault wasn't. And as such, this is a de-restricted version of that engine. Now, the V12 LMR, in its prototype form, was putting out about 580, 600-ish horsepower. This one, in de-restricted form, has 700 horsepower and 520 pound-feet of torque. In an SUV, with a lot of weight taken out, that's pretty impressive. Now, it's got a 6-speed manual gearbox, and they even took it around the Nordschleife, and it did a lap in 7 minutes and 50 seconds. Now, since then, because this is almost 2 decades ago now, it has been beaten by cars which might not seem as impressive. Even some hot hatches have beaten it now. But then, if you compare it to the vehicles of that time, no car like this even came close. Certainly not a hatchback. And for me personally, one of the things that I find even more impressive than just the raw lap time is the speed that BMW claim, and you could believe them, I see no reason not to, that they claim that the car hit going around the ring. 192 miles per hour. That is remarkably quick for an SUV, and yet again, that is another strong similarity between the X5 Le Mans and the Renault Espace F1, because the Renault Espace is sometimes quoted as being a 194 mile per hour car, which again is very, very similar between the two, although in the case of this one, it's kind of more impressive because it does that with 150 horsepower less. Overall then, the X5 Le Mans has about as much real-world relevance, or even as much racing relevance, as the Espace F1 does, which is basically zero. However, from a marketing point of view, it's a powerful tool. And the slight difference is, the Renault was made more as a tribute to the existing legacy of the Espace, and looking forward to the future of it, whereas the X5 Le Mans was purely a marketing tool to be a harbinger of the X5's coming, rather than celebrating its existence already. So there is that difference between the two, but overall I certainly think of this as being the BMW equivalent to that car. And if you can even make that comparison, that indicates this is a pretty crazy machine, and that it certainly is. So overall, it's a car which I think definitely deserves to be talked about more, and it's not quite as obscure as some of the others in this series. It is certainly a car that has a fan base. There are people who talk about it, but nonetheless, it is a car which does, as I said, deserve to have more conversations, really, about it and how badass and how crazy and how cool it actually is. But that's it overall for this particular pick. Of course, if you are new to this series, you can click through to see all of the other episodes at the end of this video. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.